I want to point out a guy in Titanic that you may not have noticed before. Pay attention to this man right here with the glasses. We see him a few times throughout the movie in some of the background shots. We see him again here. Anyway, he features in a deleted scene that shows him being rescued from the water. And it was filmed in the first place because this was an event that actually happened and he played a real person. So he represents a man named Fang Lang, and he was one of 8 Chinese passengers on Titanic. 2 of them did not survive, 5 of them made it onto lifeboats, and Fang Lang was pulled out of the water by 5th Officer Low on lifeboat number 14. They found him balancing on top of a door, and then they pulled him into the lifeboat. Now, Fang and the other 5 Chinese survivors, they kind of disappeared from history. We don't really know too much about them until now. There's now a new documentary coming out called The Six, which outlines a little bit more about their history, talks to their family. The release date was postponed because of the pandemic, but it looks pretty interesting. What exactly happened to the bodies after the Titanic sank? As many of you know, 1,500 people perished in the sinking, but the majority of the bodies actually remained afloat because there were plenty of life jackets for everybody. In total, there were only 340 bodies that were recovered. Now, the White Star Line chartered 4 ships to go and search for bodies, and the first of those ships was the Mackie Bennett. Upon arriving at the wreck site, the Mackie Bennett quickly realized there were a lot more bodies than they anticipated. So what they would do is they would bring the body on board, check for identification, and then write a detailed description of the corpse. Each body was then either embalmed right on the ship, or if it had decomposed, it would be buried at sea. In total, the Mackie Bennett recovered 306 bodies, 116 were buried at sea, and 190 were brought on board. Today, the remains of 150 victims can be found in Halifax, Nova Scotia, including the grave of the now famous Joseph Dawson, who many have confused for the fictional Jack Dawson. Fun fact about the Titanic. So Titanic had 2 sister ships, and most of you know that, but there's a line in the movie that tends to confuse some people.
I don't see what all the fuss is about. It doesn't look any bigger than the Mauretania.
So some people have asked me whether the Mauretania was a sister ship or the Lusitania, which they weren't. They were ships owned by Titanic's rival company. Titanic's sisters were the Olympic and the Britannic, but there's a very simple way to identify which ship belongs to which company, and it all stems from the name. Let me explain. So quick history lesson. Titanic was owned by this company here, the White Star Line, and they owned a bunch of ships like the Titanic, Britannic, Olympic. Now, White Star Line's rival was this company here, the Cunard Line, and they had a bunch of ships like the Lusitania, the Mauretania, and the Carpathia, the ship that rescued Titanic. Did you notice a pattern? All White Star Line ships end in IC, so Nomadic, Olympic, Titanic. And all Cunard liners end in IA, so Lusitania and Mauretania. So was the Mauretania a sister ship? No. You may not recognize this man, but you probably recognize his music. Yes, this is James Horner, who is an American film composer. And he's best known for composing the Titanic soundtrack. And he even won 2 Oscars because of it. Now, what you may not know is that he actually composed many other film scores to movies that you probably recognize. So here's just a couple of them. You got Braveheart, the Casper soundtrack, the original Jumanji movie, and the best one, by the way, Apollo 13, The Perfect Storm, the Troy soundtrack, The Grinch, and of course Avatar and many other films too. Now, there are a lot of similarities in his music and you can hear it. Let me compare 2 songs and I'll show you. Though tragically, James Horner died in a plane crash in 2015. Okay, this is a really good Titanic question. Why was Titanic listing to port when she hit the iceberg on the starboard side? All right, to give you all a little bit of context, it's now believed by most that Titanic did indeed begin listing to port as the night progressed. And we can see that here very clearly in the animation done by Titanic Honor and Glory. They did a really good job showing that port list. And one of the most likely reasons is because of this right here. So midway through the sinking, one of the main gangway doors was ordered to be opened, and it was just never shut. Second Officer Lightoller at some point in the night ordered his men to go down to D-deck, open the door, with the intent of making the evacuation easier. He wanted to load people on from that main reception. Although that never ended up happening and the door just stayed open for the rest of the night. So when that open door finally reached the waterline, all of that excess water caused the ship to begin listing to port. And if we skip ahead, you can really see how much it's tilted. Titanic fact. So I want to talk about this overturned lifeboat here. You may remember in the movie that they try to bring this lifeboat down and it lands upside down. Now, this is something that really happened on Titanic. This is Lifeboat Collapsible B, and it really was overturned in the water, and around 20 to 30 men were able to climb on top and survive. And a lot of those men ended up becoming quite famous and were very important witnesses after the disaster. Okay, so Titanic had 20 lifeboats, and 4 of those were smaller collapsible lifeboats. 2 of them were stored on deck here and here, while the other 2 were stored above on the officers' quarters. This is Collapsible A, and the one on top here is Collapsible B, the one that we're talking about. Now, both these boats were never launched. They simply washed off the ship. They ran out of time. So a lot of the men by Collapsible B just clung on to the overturned boat. Some of the men saved on this boat include Second Officer Lightoller, the highest ranked officer to survive, Harold Bride, the junior wireless operator, and Charles Jugan, the drunk baker who eventually swam to this boat. Okay, yes, let's talk about the other lifeboat that was never launched and just washed off the ship. This is Collapsible A, and it would be that lifeboat right up there. You may also recognize it as this lifeboat in the movie that Cal bullies his way onto. Okay, so unlike Collapsible B, Collapsible A did stay right side up, and they were desperately trying to launch it before the ship went down. First Officer Murdoch ordered the davits to be cranked in to try to launch that boat. In the movie, you can hear him say it. And in the wreck today, you can find that first davit in that cranked in position, showing Murdoch's final efforts to try to get that boat launched. Sadly, they ran out of time and the boat started getting washed off deck, and at some point it tipped and a lot of the people fell off the boat. People then scrambled to get back into the boat, and by that point it was half swamped because the canvas sides were still down. A dozen or so people stayed in that half swamped boat until they were finally rescued by Lifeboat 14. Sadly, many people died in the boat, and they found Collapsible A a month later with 3 bodies inside. Do you guys know there's a new Titanic game coming out? I mean, if you're into Titanic, you probably know about this, but either way, let me tell you about Titanic Honor and Glory, because it's super exciting. You may recognize this YouTube video, which went viral in 2016. It basically shows a new animation of the Titanic sinking in real time. It's very detailed and it shows every minute of the sinking. It was made by Titanic Honor and Glory to promote their video game. Basically, it's going to be a mystery game. You have to solve a case before the ship sinks. And the whole project was started by these 3 guys, Tom, Matt, and Kyle. And they've teamed up with some of the world's Titanic experts to make this the most accurate representation of the ship. And the really cool part about this is the tour mode, where you can literally explore every part of the ship. There's currently a demo available that you can download yourself, and you can just walk around and explore the ship. The game will also feature a detailed depiction of the sinking. Now, the game is still being developed and the release date is yet to be announced, but I've been following their YouTube channel for a long time, and I recommend any Titanic nerd to do so as well. Why were some of Titanic's lifeboats launched half full? Well, there were several reasons. At first, no one knew what was going on. Most passengers had no clue Titanic was sinking. There was no public announcement system, so most passengers were just told by their stewards to go up to the boat deck for a lifeboat drill. And then when they got there, it was cold, it was noisy, and the boats didn't really look that secure. Also, by 1240, when the first lifeboat was launched, the angle of the ship wasn't really that noticeable, so people didn't feel like they were in danger. It was very hard to convince them to step into a wooden boat compared to the nicely lit, warm, seemingly unsinkable Titanic. Also, officers were trying to launch those forward lifeboats as quickly as possible before it was too late, so they just launched them half full. Boat number 7, which was the first one to be launched, had a capacity of 65 and only 28 passengers. And a lot of the crew was new and not well trained. They hadn't had a lifeboat drill before that, and they were dealing with a new type of davit, so they weren't sure if it was going to malfunction. But soon, people realized what was happening, and you ended up with scenes like this. Why did Titanic break in half? Quite simple, really. Titanic's hull was never designed to deal with all of this stress. Okay, so let's break down the sinking. So immediately after the collision, the watertight doors were closed, so all of the forward compartments started flooding first. And all the weight of the water started pulling the bow or the front section of the ship down. And as you can see, as the bow dipped, it started pulling the stern section or the back of the ship up out of the water. And one thing to note is that the aft or back section of the ship housed the reciprocating engines, the turbines, so a lot of very heavy machinery. In addition, in the middle of the ship, there was a natural weak point. If you notice here, right in front of this third funnel, you'll see a vent, and it goes all the way down, right there. So what happens? The stern keeps on rising up until the stress is too much, and at around 25 degrees, it splits right in front of the third funnel. Did you guys know there's an alternate ending to Titanic? It's really bad, it's really corny, and here it is.
closer. I'll drop it.
You had it the entire time?
I thought about selling it. I thought of Cal. And somehow, I made it without his help.
Holy shit.
And I've come all the way here to put it back where it belongs.
Wait. Just let me hold it in my hand. Jesus, no!
Alright, I got some Titanic news for you guys. So it looks like you'll be able to dive to the wreck starting in May of 2021. A company called Ocean Gate Expeditions is going to be doing research dives from May to September. And all you gotta do is pay $125,000 and you can go down and see the Titanic. And there's actually already around 36 people booked for the first 6 expeditions. And the whole idea is that you're not just going along for the ride, they actually consider you part of the crew. So they would treat you as a mission specialist or a citizen scientist. So the paying customers or the mission specialists would sign up for an 8-day expedition. Each dive would take around 6 to 8 hours and it would leave from St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. And you'd be assisting in surveying the wreck with the end goal of monitoring the decay of the ship. And I just checked the company website and it's legit. Like, it's a thing that's actually happening. So if you guys happen to have $125,000 laying around, let me know. Would you guys sign up? Was Titanic really declared to be unsinkable? This is a question that everybody always asks me, and the simple answer is no. Except yes, to a certain extent. So let me explain. Okay, so let's talk about 2 very important companies. First, you have the White Star Line, which was the company that owned the Titanic. And then you have the shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff, the company that built Titanic. Now, neither of these companies officially declared or guaranteed that Titanic would be unsinkable. So why do we think Titanic was unsinkable? Because the truth is that the majority of the public in 1912 did in fact believe that, and for a number of reasons. Firstly, in 1911, Harland and Wolff published Titanic's new safety features in the Shipbuilder magazine. And there were also newspaper articles that highlighted Titanic's new 16 watertight compartments, and it was the media that began to refer to Titanic as practically unsinkable. The White Star Line also claimed that they only ever described Titanic as being designed to be unsinkable because, of course, no ship is designed to sink. But even though no company guaranteed it, most believed Titanic was unsinkable. How did Titanic sink if she had watertight compartments? So the question is, how did the water move from compartment to compartment? Yeah, so Titanic did have 16 watertight compartments. However, those compartments only extended up to E deck and D deck for the first 2 bulkheads at the front, and they weren't closed at the top, so they weren't truly watertight. And Titanic was only designed to stay afloat with 2 compartments flooded, or sometimes 3 or 4 depending on the conditions and depending on which compartments were flooded. And the collision that night actually damaged 5 compartments and a little bit into the 6th, so water started pouring into those compartments. And it ended up working like an ice cube tray. Since the compartments weren't closed at the top, the weight of the water started pulling the ship down, and the water started moving into the following compartments. And in fact, after Titanic sank, her sister ship, the Olympic, was refitted, and a lot of those bulkheads were extended up, just for extra safety.